Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. She filed police reports, she got a protection order, she followed the law. And still, on a Sunday morning in August, someone walked into her house and pulled the trigger. This isn't just a story about violence, it's about what happens when every warning sign is ignored. You may think you've heard this kind of story before, but not like this. Not with the details you're about to hear, because this time, it wasn't just the law that failed her. It was everyone. The house sat on Arlene Avenue, in a subdivision just east of Baton Rouge, technically within central Louisiana, but just enough off the grid that outsiders wouldn't look twice driving by. White trim, gray brick, two windows facing the street, a neatly trimmed lawn. It could have been anyone's home. And for the last 5 years, it belonged to a woman named Alanna Singleton. She lived alone. Retired from her job as a school aide, kept a tight routine, she was the kind of person who always picked up her mail, which is why the mail, uncollected, sticking halfway out of the box, was the first thing the neighbor across the street noticed that morning. That and the silence. No wind chimes. No TV through the window. Just quiet. Too quiet. And then came the sound. Two sharp, consecutive cracks. It didn't take long before 911 lines lit up. 3 separate calls from the same street, all within 90 seconds. Each reported the same thing. 2 loud bangs, a scream, and silence. Again. Deputies from East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office arrived at 9:47 a.m., 6 minutes after the first call. No response at the door. One deputy walked the perimeter. Another shined a flashlight through the blinds. What they saw was the shape of a body, motionless, just beyond the hallway leading into the back bedroom. They forced entry. What they found confirmed the worst. Alanna Singleton, age 54, was pronounced dead on scene. Single gunshot wound to the head. Seated upright in the bedroom chair. No signs of defensive wounds. No struggle. Roughly 20 feet away in the living room, a second adult, male, unresponsive, lying flat on his back. Obvious self-inflicted trauma to the head. The handgun, a black Glock 19, was still in his right hand. Both deaths appeared fresh, within minutes of the initial calls, not hours. No forced entry, no signs of theft, no ransacked drawers. The TV remote sat undisturbed on the coffee table. But there was one item that stood out. On the kitchen counter, between a stack of unopened mail and a glass of water still half full, was a 3-page printed document. Folded at the corner, time-stamped June 25, 2025. It was a protective order, issued to Alanna Singleton, filed against the man now lying dead on her living room floor. Detective Camille Roy from the Major Crimes Unit arrived 20 minutes later. She'd seen more than her share of domestic cases, but this one had a tone to it, something procedural. She noted the position of the bodies, the glass, the kitchen lights still on. The order, placed deliberately, almost too deliberately. She looked over at the door. It wasn't kicked in. No pry marks, no broken frame. Whoever had entered was either let in or had access. Inside the envelope containing the protective order, she found a handwritten note, Alanna's signature, confirming delivery and acknowledgement. June 25th, 6 weeks before her death. Detective Roy's first thoughts weren't about motive. They were about failure. Because the system's fingerprints were already here, tucked beneath the mail, stamped on the court order, printed on the police report, everything had been done by the book. And yet, here they were. No shell casings had been moved. The gun had not been wiped down. The scene lacked the chaos typical of break-ins or revenge killings. Instead, it looked surgical, methodical, as if someone had followed a script. And yet, it wasn't theatrical. No spray paint, no messages on the wall. Nothing that screamed attention, only what was needed. 2 bullets, 2 bodies. What made this harder wasn't the blood, it was the paper trail. Alanna had left warnings, she had left dates, names, testimony, and no one listened fast enough. As the forensics team began bagging evidence, Roy ordered a full scan of digital devices inside the home. Phones, laptops, smart TV logs, smart home devices. She knew that timelines in cases like this don't just live in text messages. They live in app logs, in browser histories, in Alexa command records. She also noticed the front door's ring-style doorbell camera had a blinking red light. But when technicians accessed the footage, they found nothing. The logs had been manually deleted within the last 24 hours. To someone like Roy, that wasn't just suspicious, it was decisive. Because most domestic homicides don't involve pre-deletion of surveillance data. Most killers aren't thinking about optics, but this one had say. Outside, the neighbors gathered, quiet, muffled, watching from behind storm doors, some crying, others frozen. One man, mid-60s in sandals, asked a deputy if it was really her. When the deputy nodded, he just shook his head. "She tried to get help," he muttered. "She really tried." Detective Roy pulled her tablet and began compiling early facts. No forced entry. 2 deceased, 1 female, resident, 1 male, unconfirmed. Firearm found on male, 1 shot to self, 1 round in bedroom chair. House clean. No struggle, victim clothed, no signs of assault. Digital evidence, camera logs, cleared. Protective order found, dated June 25th. It was too much precision for a spur-of-the-moment act. But there was no third party, no evidence of outside contact. Whoever did this came prepared and knew exactly where everything was. So if it wasn't random, was it predictable? And if it was predictable, why wasn't it prevented? Before the crime scene was processed, before the autopsy reports were signed, and before the news broke beyond East Baton Rouge, investigators had one priority: establish victim identity and background. Alanna Singleton, 54 years old, divorced, no children, registered property owner at 1143 Arlene Avenue, lived alone since 2019. According to DMV records and parish databases, she'd worked over 2 decades as an assistant educator within the East Baton Rouge parish school system. Retired early following a spinal injury from a car accident in late 2018. Afterward, she focused on local volunteering, animal shelters, literacy programs, and a short stint mentoring young women at a transitional housing nonprofit. Neighbors described her as quiet, routine-driven, and always polite. Surveillance footage from previous months confirmed a limited pattern of external activity: grocery runs, medical appointments, solo. No regular visitors besides one male figure appearing sporadically across late 2022 and spring 2023. That figure was confirmed by prior law enforcement records to be the man found deceased inside her home. At this stage of the investigation, his identity wasn't formally released. Detectives were under standard 48-hour hold while family notifications were being made. But internally, his name was already written across multiple case files, dating back to June of the same year. Detective Camille Roy pulled the archived incident report from June 24, 2025, exactly 40 days before the shooting. It detailed a domestic battery call-out, where Alanna Singleton had reported being physically assaulted by her then-partner after an argument escalated in her kitchen. She stated that she was shoved backward into a stair rail, causing her to fall 3 steps onto her back and head. No paramedic was called at the time. She had declined, but she later visited the ER independently and presented with bruising to her torso, shoulder, and a minor laceration behind her right ear. She documented the attack that same evening with police. The report was brief but precise. She did not speculate on motive. She did not demand an arrest. She requested no contact going forward. What she did do, however, was request a temporary protection order the next morning. That petition, filed in district court on June 25th, included handwritten remarks, initially redacted for public view. Investigators gained full access post-mortem. The language was deliberate. "He has a key. He will use it. He said if I went to the police again, he'd end it before they arrived." The court granted her a temporary protective order under Louisiana Civil Code 46-2131 ETSCQ. It restricted the subject, referred to in court as a known partner with documented violence, from approaching within 100 yards of her residence, vehicle, workplace, or initiating any contact through phone, text, or third party. No GPS monitor was issued, no firearm surrender order was attached, no follow-up review was scheduled until August 30th, 2025. That hearing never happened. Investigators verified that Alanna had followed all required steps for enforcement. She filed the report, signed the protective order, delivered it to the appropriate office, kept a printed copy in her home, as instructed. Digital logs from her smartphone, retrieved under emergency search warrant, show she also emailed a scanned version to her attorney, 2 friends, and a domestic violence counselor at a local women's clinic. For a woman described as private to a fault, these actions indicated a significant level of internal fear. In one message to her counselor, dated July 3rd, she wrote, "I don't want to be dramatic. I just want to feel like I can sleep at night." Forensic attention turned to timeline narrowing. When did she last have contact? When was she last seen in person? What signals, if any, pointed to escalation? Her phone activity on August 2nd, the day before her death, was minimal. She placed one voice call at 10:23 a.m. to her pharmacy. A reminder text was sent from her primary care office at 1:17 p.m. confirming a routine follow-up appointment for the following Friday. That appointment was never canceled. At 7:43 p.m., she sent a single SMS to a close friend in Denham Springs. "I think I saw his car again. Could be paranoia. Probably is." There was no reply. The next outgoing activity from her phone occurred the following morning, August 3rd at 8:54 a.m. when a food delivery app was opened but no order was placed. At 9:36 a.m. her Ring doorbell detected motion. The video file, as noted in Chapter 1, had been deleted. 6 minutes later, multiple neighbors dialed 911. Detectives examining the full scope of Alanna's paper trail noted she had never previously filed charges or restraining orders, not in past relationships, employment conflicts, or property disputes. There were no prior criminal complaints with her name listed as either victim or suspect. No insurance claims for assault, no active civil litigation, which made the request for protection in June all the more serious. From a behavioral analysis standpoint, victims who go through the procedural steps, especially those with no history of confrontation, are typically considered high credibility petitioners. In interviews with the case prosecutor assigned to her June incident, it was revealed Alanna had opted not to pursue criminal charges against the man she reported. Her stated reason, recorded in intake notes, was, "I don't want him to go to jail, I just want distance." That detail would later become the subject of scrutiny. Because in cases where violence is documented but prosecution is declined by the victim, legal protections become more fragile. Enforcement is often limited to passive monitoring. Alanna had not been passive, but the system around her remained reactionary, not preventative. Detective Roy reviewed every contact Alanna made in the 6 weeks before her death. Phone logs, emails, public utility account access. There were no outgoing calls to law enforcement during that time, no new threats recorded. Just a pattern of life, calm on the surface, increasingly insular underneath. A neighbor across the street later told detectives, "She'd leave the porch light on all day. That was new. She used to only flip it on at night. I asked her once and she said, 'Just feel better with it.'" Small changes, gradual, but consistent with what DV advocates refer to as threat anticipation behavior. This behavior often precedes final acts of violence. Not because victims know something will happen, but because they've lived close enough to it that fear becomes instinct. Alanna Singleton left no voicemail, no video diary, no hidden audio files or recordings, but what she left behind was something different. A forensic outline of escalation across medical visits, police reports, legal filings, digital patterns, and behavioral adjustments. What she left was a timeline that anyone could follow. The question now, for investigators and for us, is why no one followed it in time. The man lying dead in the living room was officially identified within hours, Paul Joseph Varnado, 54 years old. According to DMV and court records, he was a licensed contractor from Denham Springs. His name was already on file, specifically on the protective order Alanna Singleton filed in June. Varnado had no felony convictions, nothing that would stand out in a standard background check, but investigators quickly discovered that his record didn't reflect the full story. In 2017, a woman filed for a restraining order against him in East Louisiana Parish. She claimed he'd threatened her after their breakup. The order was granted but dropped when she didn't appear in court. In 2019, deputies were called after another ex-girlfriend reported Varnado banging on her windows. He wasn't arrested, just warned. In both cases, there were no charges, no prosecution, no follow-up. And now another woman had gone to the police, this time with injuries, and this time she didn't want him arrested. She just wanted him gone. Alanna filed her order on June 25, 2025, after telling officers Varnado pushed her down the stairs during an argument. She didn't press criminal charges. She told the court she feared retaliation. The judge granted the order, but there was no firearm surrender, No GPS monitoring, no follow-up. When investigators examined the Glock 19 found next to Varnado's body, it was confirmed, legally owned, purchased in 2016. He had never been flagged. Detectives pulled data from his phone. The last text he sent 1 week before the murders read, "You'll see, you'll all see." His browsing history the night before the shooting included searches like, how long does it take police to respond to a 911 call? Can you go to jail for violating restraining order? GPS logs showed he was near Alanna's house the day before she died. No message sent. No call made. No warning. The medical examiner later confirmed Alanna was shot once in the head, at close range. Varnado's own shot came 2 minutes later. There were no defensive wounds. No signs of a fight. Nothing messy. Everything about the crime scene told investigators he knew exactly what he came to do. It was a Wednesday morning in early August 2025, the kind of heavy Louisiana heat that made everything feel like it was stuck in time. But time didn't stop. Not for Alanna Singleton, not for the responding officer who arrived at her house just after 7:50 a.m. A neighbor had called 911 after hearing a single loud bang. No scream, no follow-up, just one sound, sharp and final, like something closing for good. What first seemed like a domestic disturbance quickly turned into something else. Officers from the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office forced entry into the modest home on the east side of Lake Charles. Inside, they found 2 bodies. The living room was silent. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, just a couch with one indentation, a side table with an empty mug, and a body slumped forward. Alanna Singleton, 54, was already cold to the touch. Near the back hallway, another body lay on the floor. Paul Varnado, 55, a single gunshot wound to his head. Next to him, the weapon, a .38 caliber revolver registered under Paul's name. No one else was present. There were no signs of forced entry from the outside, no defensive wounds on either party. To investigators, the initial scene painted a picture of murder-suicide. But here's the thing about crime scenes. They don't always reveal what they hide. Forensics began documenting the space, the angle of the bullet entry on Alanna's chest, the powder residue on Paul's right hand, and the blood splatter trajectory. And in the margins of the official report, one note stood out. Protective order on file. Dated May 2025. That detail changed everything. It wasn't just a domestic incident. It was a systemic failure in motion. In Alanna's bedroom drawer, officers found a manila envelope with court documents. One was a temporary restraining order filed against Paul 3 months prior, citing physical abuse and escalating threats. In her handwritten statement, Alanna had noted, "He knows where I live. He said if he can't have me, no one will." Now those words were evidence, but the most haunting piece of evidence wasn't the weapon or the bodies. It was the silence. No sign of forced resistance. No last attempt to run. Had Alanna been caught off guard, or had she simply given up believing protection could arrive in time? As the coroner's team took over, detectives began mapping the timeline. Paul Varnado had not been seen by his co-workers for 3 days. His truck was parked 2 blocks away. Investigators retrieved dashcam footage from a neighbor's driveway capturing Paul walking toward Alanna's home just before sunrise. At this stage, Paul was presumed the shooter. But was that the whole story? Why was no entry forced? Why did the neighbor only hear one gunshot when both victims had died from separate wounds? That's where Chapter 5 begins, because what seemed conclusive might not have been complete. By the time digital evidence teams began parsing data on August 5, 2025, a crucial picture was emerging. First, the Ring doorbell camera at Alanna's home. The footage had been manually deleted, but forensic specialists recovered metadata timestamps. That log showed a connection from an unknown device at 9:36 a.m. on August 3rd, exactly 6 minutes before the first gunshot was reported. At the same time, network logs from Alanna's home Wi-Fi revealed a dark period of 39 seconds of signal pinging from an unrecognized MAC address. That window corresponds precisely with motion detection markers near the front door. Investigators triangulated that same device's signal to a smartphone traced to Paul Varnado, matching his phone's unique identifier. He had accessed the home's network, not once, but twice in the 24 hours prior to the shooting. That pattern suggested premeditation, not coincidence. Next, cell tower data. Paul's phone pinged off cell towers at 4:12 p.m. on August 2nd, placing him within 1.2 miles of the house for nearly an hour. He did not make a call, send a text, or log into any app at that time. The next activity on his device wasn't until August 4th, after the bodies had been discovered. Similarly, Alanna's device showed a message at 7:43 p.m. on August 2nd to a friend. "I think I saw his car again. Could be paranoia." No reply. No further outgoing messages until 8:54 a.m. on August 3rd, when she briefly used a food app but did not submit an order. Forensic logs also showed interesting discrepancies. The front bedroom light was powered off at 9:30 a.m. and stayed off. The kitchen overhead light on at 9:33 a.m., off by 9:38 a.m. The television remained turned off for the entire recorded timeline. These device-powered angles helped refine the timeline. It appears the intruder arrived, entered the quietly lit house, moved without triggering lights, and acted efficiently. During the autopsy, no traces of sedatives or intoxicants were found in either body. Toxicology reports came back clean. That meant both died with full awareness. Powder residue analysis placed gunshot distance at under 6 inches for Alanna, confirming a close-range shot. Varnado's own wound showed residue on his right hand and no soot inside the barrel, consistent with distance and angle. Ballistics tested the recovered .38 revolver. The bullet matched Alanna's skull and the second matched Varnado's wound. Serial numbers traced back to a legal purchase in 2016. No record of further modifications. Beyond physical forensic data, police reviewed previous interactions with first responders. There were no 911 calls from Alanna between June 25th and August 3rd. No requests for welfare checks. Her protective order had not triggered any follow-up visits by deputies. That reveals a stark pattern: procedural compliance without proactive enforcement. The law existed, but in practice lacked teeth. Detective Camille Roy, reviewing the digital and forensic report, noted, "No forced entry, no sign of defensive action, just efficient planning rooted in technological erasure." She added, "In towns like Duluth, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community." By August 6, 2025, investigators were full into analyzing tangible evidence, leading them into a maze of legal gaps and enforcement failures. The firearm recovered from the scene was a .38 caliber revolver, registered to Paul Varnado in 2016. Louisiana law requires background checks for firearm purchases. His check cleared without issue. That purchase fell under a civilian transfer exception. It carried no flag of prior violence because no conviction existed. In the absence of criminal charges, the protective order Alanna obtained on June 25th did not demand surrender of firearms. In many states, such a clause is standard, but not in Louisiana unless explicitly requested and signed off by a judge. In Paul's case, it was not requested. It was not granted. At the forensics lab, technicians tested the revolver. Ballistics confirmed one bullet struck Alanna in the temple. The second matched Varnado's self-inflicted wound. Gun serial numbers matched state records and firearm trace databases. There was no DNA under the grip, no fingerprints other than Paul's right-hand prints, a signature move, not a struggle. Clothing fibers on the grip were consistent with his jacket thread, confirming he handled the weapon immediately before it discharged. Investigative teams then moved to look at prior cases involving Paul. In earlier incidents from 2017 and 2019, restraining orders had been filed and dropped due to lack of follow-through. Analyzing police call logs, detectives found no pattern of risk assessments triggered, even after multiple reports. Departments across 3 parishes had documented a similar narrative: warnings left unheeded. That translated into a form of tacit invisibility. If someone reported but did not follow through with pressing charges, the system did not escalate. The order existed on paper. Enforcement did not. Detective Camille Roy reviewed the legal instruction manual for domestic protective orders. She noted differences between states. While some require mandatory surrender of firearms upon filing, Louisiana only requires action if the order specifies it. The court file revealed no checkbox ticked for weapon surrender in Paul's case. At the scene, investigators also collected a pair of latex gloves folded into Paul's jacket pocket. They were unused. Next to the gloves lay a burner phone, last active on July 30th, but not connected to Paul's primary number. That device contained no contacts, no calls, just a few texts to his own email, draft messages he apparently never sent. Examining the timeline more closely, The team discovered Paul ordered one magazine clip refill from an online gun shop on July 28th, shipping to his home. That purchase came during the same week as Alanna's escalating concern. At the same time, the team pulled records of no prior arrests or convictions, meaning Paul remained eligible to purchase under federal and state law. His access to the weapon was entirely legal until it was lethal. This is where legal loopholes and physical evidence intersected. The lack of enforcement did not turn legal documents into deterrent. For Alanna, the paper protective order offered no protection in practice, nor did the system demand it. In the station briefing, Roy summarized, "He legally owned the gun. He was never required to surrender it, and officials across 3 counties logged complaints, but none followed up. That made the document feel like decoration." A closer look at Alanna's hospital records from June 24th also revealed forensic details. Bruises consistent with blunt trauma to the upper right shoulder and tailbone. There were no broken bones, no internal bleeding, but visible signs of force applied via impact. When those photos were archived with the protective order, they were filed, but not logged for active follow-up. Alanna's case notes included a line, "No witness corroboration, victim declined prosecution." That phrase recurred across older cases in other parishes. If the victim withdrew, the system withdrew too. Forensic analysts also reconstructed the revolver's trajectory using 3D crime scene modeling. They calculated the relative height and angle. Alanna was seated, leaning slightly forward. The barrel rested under 6 inches from her scalp. Immediately after, Paul's own shot was upward, entering his chin and exiting the skull top. That kind of precision, captured on camera and referenced in digital ballistic simulations, narrowed the time window to a few seconds between shots. No hesitation, no sign of confusion, just one directed act, and then another. Legal consultants reviewing the case identified a policy vulnerability. After Alanna filed the order, she attended a 1-hour informational session about protective order rights offered by the court. She was told the police would only enforce the order if she placed a new 911 call, or if the subject violated the order formally. There was no mention of emergency firearm confiscation or daily welfare checks. By the time of her death, Alanna had complied fully with court requirements. She filed the report, kept her copy of the order on the kitchen counter. She emailed her counselor, but there was no added layer of enforcement beyond that. Detectives also compared other murder-suicides in Louisiana from 2024 to 25. Findings showed that in cases with protective orders, 80% of offenders retained access to a weapon unless surrender was specifically ordered. Enforcement was inconsistent, particularly in rural parishes. The majority of known murders occurred when there was a documented separation attempt, but no follow-up mechanism to enforce court orders. Those statistics aligned with Alanna's case. A legal order existed, but after June 25th, no one checked, no deputy knocked, no paperwork called for confiscation. This chapter closes with a reflection, not on emotional trauma, but on systemic failure. The evidence was clear: the revolver, the gloves, the online ammo order, the legal oversight, but none of it shifted the outcome in time. When law and evidence collide, the bullet still travels. By early July 2025, the situation between Alanna Singleton and Paul Varnado had entered its most volatile phase. The relationship, already under the strain of multiple documented incidents of domestic violence, was now shaped by legally sanctioned distance. But legal distance is not the same as physical safety, especially when the subject in question was actively violating that space through subtle, under-the-radar moves that left no immediate arrestable trace. The protective order granted to Alanna on June 25, 2025, was valid across parish lines. It explicitly barred contact, physical proximity, and any attempts at intimidation or harassment. Yet it came with one critical omission. There was no clause ordering the surrender of firearms and no mechanism for follow-up. That detail, seemingly bureaucratic, would later define the fatal outcome. In the weeks that followed, Paul Varnado remained largely off the radar of law enforcement. There were no new 911 calls, no public disturbances, but digital evidence and private testimonies would later reveal a pattern of escalation not visible from the outside. Alanna's email inbox showed a gradual tightening of her digital boundaries. On July 2nd, she changed all her passwords. On July 5th, she enabled 2-factor authentication on her banking app and Gmail account. On July 9th, she initiated an application with a private security service for consultation, which was never completed. Her browser history, retrieved post-mortem with a warrant, showed late-night searches for topics like how long does a restraining order last in Louisiana, how to block someone from showing up at your house, and how to know if someone is watching your house without you seeing them. Nothing in those searches violated the law. But they confirmed what law enforcement would later classify as pre-incident behavioral distress, an escalating sense of being hunted without the resources to legally act on it. A neighbor, whose identity remains confidential, later testified to seeing Paul's vehicle slowly circling the block several times between July 12th and July 24th. Each time he did not park. He did not approach. He simply drove by. These incidents were never reported, likely because they never escalated into anything overt. But in hindsight, they were not incidental. They were surveillance runs. Further investigation into Paul's digital footprint uncovered evidence of deliberate concealment. A secondary email address, registered under a misspelled name variation, was used to place an online order for a six-pack of latex gloves, a burner phone, and a speed loader compatible with the revolver later used in the murder-suicide. All were delivered via courier between July 27 and 30. The order itself was legal. The intention behind it wasn't. Authorities retrieved the burner phone from Paul's jacket at the crime scene. Its activity was minimal. No outgoing calls, no incoming texts. But it had connected to public Wi-Fi at 3 locations: a gas station near Alanna's home, a rest stop 2 towns over, and a motel off the I-10 corridor. Surveillance footage confirmed Paul was the user at all 3 locations. This trail, though thin, painted a portrait of calculated planning. Paul had no history of mental illness flagged in public records. He had no outstanding warrants, but he had motive, means, and most importantly, time. What investigators noticed in retrospect was the absence of system checks. At no point during this time did any official or automated system cross-reference the active protective order with firearms databases, purchase histories, or geolocation surveillance. Even though Paul had legally bought ammunition just days before the attack, no alert was triggered. Forensic interviews with those close to Alanna confirmed her growing fear, though she was reluctant to escalate. A former co-worker described Alanna's demeanor as guarded but determined, saying she was trying not to make a scene, but she was clearly afraid of being caught off guard. One of her last written entries, found in a locked notes app on her phone, read, "If something happens, it's not an accident. I've told people, I've tried to be careful, but he's smart about staying invisible." This note was time-stamped July 29, 2025, just 5 days before the fatal incident. In the aftermath, crime analysts pointed to a well-documented trend in domestic violence cases: the pre-homicide silence. The final stage of escalation often includes a deceptive lull, no outward violence, no obvious breach, before a calculated attack occurs. In Alanna's case, that pattern held. Though investigators confirmed Paul made no direct contact with Alanna in the final 2 weeks, the circumstantial buildup was undeniable. He tracked her. He avoided digital detection. He waited for opportunity, not confrontation. The scene on August 3, 2025 confirmed that opportunity came in the form of routine. Alanna had not changed the locks. Her security camera system was still in delivery status, not yet installed. She was at home alone in the early hours of the morning, between 6 o'clock and 6:30 a.m. when Paul entered. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. It is presumed, based on prior witness statements, that Paul retained a key from his time living there, though the lock had not been formally changed. She was in the kitchen, according to position of her body and blood splatter analysis. 1 shot to the head, no defensive wounds, no struggle. Death was instantaneous. Paul then turned the gun on himself, collapsing near the front entry. Both bodies were discovered hours later by Alanna's adult son, who arrived for a planned weekend breakfast. His 911 call was recorded at 9:47 a.m. Forensic teams confirmed time of death as between 6:12 and 6:18 a.m. based on internal body temperature, lividity, and last known device activity. By 6:40 a.m., deputies arrived at Alanna Singleton's home after a co-worker reported her missing. Inside, they found her dead in bed, shot multiple times. Paul Varnado lay nearby, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The weapon, a Glock 40, was registered to him. No forced entry, no struggle. The scene was silent, calculated. Paul had driven 90 miles from Baton Rouge the night before. Surveillance footage placed him en route at 8:57 p.m. Cell data confirmed his path. He entered with a spare key he was never asked to return. At 9:22 p.m., Alanna texted her sister, "I feel like something's off. I'm locking the door." It was the last message she ever sent. Months earlier, she had filed for a protective order citing threats, but Paul wasn't tracked. No GPS monitoring, no enforcement check. The system didn't fail in one moment. It failed slowly, through neglect. The coroner confirmed she was shot while lying down. No defensive wounds. He meant to kill her. Nothing in the scene suggested hesitation. Authorities closed the case as a murder-suicide. People magazine published her story, quoting from her restraining order, "If I can't have you, no one will." Advocates condemned the lack of enforcement. In Louisiana, most fatal domestic violence cases involve victims who had already reached out for help. The paperwork exists, but enforcement is passive, not proactive. Alanna followed every step required. Yet in the end, her name became another statistic of a system that reacts too late. I wish I could say Alanna's story was rare. But the truth is, too many women do everything right, file the paperwork, follow the steps, only to be failed by a system that doesn't move fast enough. If you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, please know you are not alone. Trust your instincts. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. Protecting your life is never an overreaction. What do you think needs to change to make protection orders actually protect? Share your thoughts in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If this story moved you or if you've walked a similar path, your voice matters. And if this video didn't connect with you, I still want to hear why. Let's talk. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that matter. Your story might be next.